introduce myself. Okay. I can quickly introduce myself for the folks who may not know me. I work with Elevation Capital. I am a principal here. I lead some of our work on growth investments across fintech and consumer. And DPDP has been an area that we at Elevation have been studying very carefully, both because of the profound implications it can have on a lot of the companies that we invest in and for the ecosystem at large, which is the reason that we wanted to get the experts in the room to sort of help demystify what the implications are, given the government announced the draft rules a little while ago. So with that, I'd actually love to introduce our two experts today. Ashok and Supratim, let me quickly introduce Ashok. Ashok is the CEO of IDfy. IDfy is India's premier identity platform. A lot of you might already be working with IDfy in various capacities, especially if you're fintech companies or companies who do verifications, onboardings, and so on. They're also one of the pioneers building one of the most interesting products to help manage DPDP compliance, which a bunch of banks, etc. use. So we're very excited to have him on board, hear his perspective, both as a founder and someone building in the space. Uh, Next, we have Supratim. Supratim is a partner at Khaitan. He leads their data privacy and cybersecurity practice and has also advised the government and has been on panels around DPDP and bunch of other privacy work that's been going on. He's also been an eminent advisor to most companies here in this space, given there's been a lot of flux and change that's happening. We're very excited to have both of you here. Welcome, Ashok, and welcome, Supratim.
Thank you. Thanks so
Thank you.
much.
Awesome. Maybe we can wait for a minute more and check if wait for a few more people to come in.
I think we can start, Ashray. We've got about 40 odd folks here. So
Awesome.
yeah.
I have a small request, folks. Whoever can turn on their videos, if you can turn on, that'll be fantastic. It'll be great to keep this more interactive. Thank you so much. And the way I think we'll maybe tee things off is maybe we'll spend the first 20 minutes with a quick primer. I think all of us are at different points in our understanding of the implications of what the DPDP rules are going to sort of impact our business. Maybe I'll request Supratim and Ashok to each spend maybe 10 minutes just walking us through their lens and vantage point of how they see this. Give us a 101 of what should we expect? How does life really change for us? What do we need to start doing today? And post that, we have a few questions that have come in from all of you. Maybe we'll take some of those and then we'll leave it open for Q&A. The parts where we're doing the 101, we'll record it. The part with the Q&A, we want to keep it closed door so that we can freely discuss what we want. So we'll turn off the recording then. And towards the end, Ashok, I think maybe we could do the demo of the tool you've built to help some of the folks comply better. So maybe we could do that towards the end. And in case there are more questions, we're happy to stay back to make sure we address all of those, and happy to also facilitate one-on-one introductions with Ashok and Supratim if folks want to continue or carry forward the chat, if there's anything more you guys want to discuss. So with that, I'll maybe start things off. Supratim, maybe I'll hand it over to you. Maybe if you can give us a quick overview over the next 10 minutes, that'll be great. And maybe Ashok, you can go after that.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly put up the slide deck. I'll try my best to keep it as snappy as possible. I think it's just 1 second. Let me just put up the slide. Let me know when you're able to see it and if it's full screen.
Yeah. Supratim, we can see it. It's not yet full screen. Yeah, now it's it. Now it is.
Okay, excellent. So I think it's a bit of a tricky task for all of us here because the range is quite high. Like there's some people who know everything. They have read things 2 times over, and there are people who are just getting started trying to understand and thinking whether it is applicable at all to them or not. So we'll try and sort of demystify all of this as quick as possible. Okay. So firstly, what is the status right now? Okay, right. So we've been working on this DPDP Act from July, August 2017. Justice Sri Krishna built something which was not liked by the government. It's well known that draft was scrapped because they thought that it was becoming GDPR plus plus. So they wanted something which is like doing a balancing act. The government is continuously trying to say that, listen, it's important to protect individuals' personal data. But at the same time, it's important to ensure that innovation, entrepreneurship, and ease of doing business does not suffer to the extent possible. Okay, so I think if that continues, probably it will be a good thing for the folks here. Um, so the act, got passed in 2023, and then we waited for the draft rules to come out for about a year plus. And now the draft rules have been rolled out. The consultation is on till 18th of February. I would request all of you here, if you think something is impacting you, definitely you should give the inputs. The government has said that this will not be made public, like Ashray has given this comment will not come out in the open. Maybe at the end they will do some aggregated, anonymized kind of output that we have received XYZ type of inputs from the industry. So it's not going out per se on per name basis outside. Okay. So probably there could be little bit of extension on this consultation, but don't rely too much on that. After this, what could happen? Okay, after this, the government could take in something in the range of say 1.5 months to say it's a 3 months or 4 months to kind of assimilate everything, finalize, etc. And the rules could be brought into play. Okay, so therefore, and what happens when the rules comes into play? That's also another important question. So that's the starting point of the act coming into being. Okay, from that time onwards, the data protection board will get formed, and the process will start. Probably the industry will be given somewhere between say about 12 to 18 months or max up to 24 months to completely ramp up. Okay, but don't rely again on that timeline, because the GDPR experience has shown European companies who already had a law, Europe already had a law, the 2 year that was given to them was not sufficient for them. Okay, and we will keep talking about it. What are the things to be done? It will be becoming clearer. But in short, we have to start today. Okay, because more or less what has to come out had to come out is all out there. Okay, so after that, the law comes into play, and all compliances will have to be should have been in place by that time. So in a nutshell, that's because there's some questions also around this. I tried to cover some of those pre-received questions through this. Any further questions? Very happy to answer as we go along. Who does this law apply to? Some people had that confusion question. It applies to everyone in a broad sense. Okay, don't be under the misconception that, oh, I'm a small player, it doesn't apply to me, etc. Unless the government specifically comes out with some exemption notification, which seems very unlikely, and maybe a very small kitty of players may get that exemption. Otherwise, it applies to everyone. Okay, two concepts to be kept in mind. One is data fiduciary or data controller, and one is data processor in this context. Fiduciary is the entity which is determining the purpose and means as to what is to be done with the personal data. Processor is someone who's just simply following the diktat and performing what has been told. Now, in most of the cases, you will see probably your entity will be a data controller or data fiduciary, as it is called under this law. And therefore, the obligation under this law is wholly on you. Okay, so let me give you a simple example. We have a payroll service provider. The company is giving, say, a list of employees and saying that first of every month, please ensure that these 500 people get this X salary, right? So the company is determining the purpose and means as to what has to be done with the personal data. The payroll processor is only a service provider, and therefore, under this law, there is no obligation on them. So we have to contractually pass on all that obligation. So contracts will become a very, very critical pillar, which till now was a very wishy-washy thing, right? We used to write one sentence that you will protect my data and you will indemnify me for everything. That will not work. That has to drastically change, because you have to call out what all specifically has to be done by that processor in the data context. Otherwise, the 250 crore penalty could be your baby, and that guy, even when there is a breach, can just wash off their hands and go away, right? So coming back, applicability of the law, it applies when you are processing digital personal data, or if it was non-digital but later on got digitized, then it is still applicable. Simple example, the security guard at our gate sits with a register. Per se, the physical register is outside this purview of this law, But if someone scans it or takes a photograph, etc., and puts it into the computer system network, etc., it becomes digital personal data. So it is covered. Okay. In most of the things that we are doing right now, I think it will be futile to say that it is not covering the thing, because mostly we are moving out of pure physical play where we are putting data. Foreign players, is this applicable? Yes, if they are trying to provide goods or services to people in India, they are covered. There are some minor exemptions, not very relevant for this discussion, but if it is for your pure domestic purposes, suppose you are having a birthday party, you've listed down name and phone number of your guests, that is outside. But I think that we can just and also the other thing is, if there is any entity or person which is required to put out your personal data under a law, or you are doing it yourself, you are blogging about yourself out in the open, etc., that goes outside the purview of this legislation. Very quickly, top 8 things that you need to know. One is that I have already told you, this covers digital personal data only, no non-personal data coverage. There could be a future law on that. Notice and consent will undergo a severe change. Okay, and Ashok will talk about it. There are questions around this. There are a few slides. I'll quickly take you through, because some product team members had specific questions around what do I do now, right? So I think notice and consent will go through a quantum leap. Please take note of that. There's something called consent managers which will come into play. I would request for now we keep that aside. Consent managers is basically, they'll be middlemen or intermediaries of sorts who will manage consent on behalf of individuals. The government is also still thinking how and what will be the parameters, what business case makes it lucrative, etc. So right now, for this purpose of this discussion, we can keep this aside unless there are questions on this. Significant data fiduciaries. Now, what are these players? These are players which are large players, crunching more data, very critical data. They will have additional obligations like data protection impact assessment, having a DPO in India, appointing independent data auditors, etc. Um, who are significant data fiduciaries specifically will be notified. Okay. Next is, you will have to have very robust grievance redressal mechanism. Please, underline, these are all underlined for a reason, because this law works two ways. Okay. If an individual or user or an employee comes and say, listen, I have a problem with you are the way you are handling my personal data. They will have to first come to you. They cannot jump the gun and go to data protection board and say, listen, these guys have kind of done something wrong. So therefore, if you've got that opportunity, try and resolve it at that juncture, because after that, if the person is not happy, or you have not addressed the issue, then they have the right to go to the data protection board. So it is balanced law, but you have to ensure that you have a proper redressal mechanism. Also, individuals will have rights now. Okay, this is an important thing, where whether it is user or your employees, they can come knocking at your door and say, listen, what data do you have about me? I want to access that data. I want to erase the data. I want to rectify some information there, etc. You have to pay heed to all of that. There is no categorization of personal data into sensitive personal data and critical personal data and all that, which is a good thing in a way, I would say. Transfer of personal data. Most of you could also be thinking of, moving it to maybe another jurisdiction for various reasons. Is that allowed? Under the mother legislation, we deliberated a lot. Data is freely transferable across jurisdictions, but there are two catches. One is that the government might come out with a short list of negative jurisdictions. Uh, Transacting in data for those jurisdictions could be restricted. Okay. Um, Also, if there is a stricter law, that will prevail over the general leeway. Simple example, RBI says payment systems related data cannot leave the country. Now that will prevail over this general leeway. There is something written in the draft rules, I'm not talking about it right away, which is kind of trying to make a comeback of data localization. People are very disturbed about it, especially the ones who have cross-border data transfer. So again, request is, if you are impacted, please do put a sort of recommendation, consultation input on that. Enhanced children's data related obligations, very important for for players who have some kind of child data interface. First thing, age of child is very high in our country, 18 years. Unlike GDPR, which is 16 years, it can go below up to 13 years depending on member state. You have to take verifiable parental consent if you're handling any children's data. Also, no targeted advertisement and no tracking or monitoring of children. Next important point, data breach reporting, extremely critical. No risk-based threshold or materiality threshold. It's a wide definition, so you have to go and report everything that happens, okay? And you have to go 3 times almost. Once immediately to the data protection board, you have to go again within 72 hours and again report with more details, and you have to go to individuals and report to them as well, stating a lot of things, okay? This will be on top of your requirement under CERT-IN, which is a cyber incident reporting body. If there is a sector regulator involved, like RBI, SEBI, CERSAI, all of those, would also be relevant to report. So in a bad day, within 6 to 72 hours, you have to do a lot of work. So might as well look at a playbook of sorts or train your, teams. We'll keep talking about it. Okay. Last is, I already mentioned this, that there is no obligation on data processor. In my example, that entity which is doing your payroll processing has zero liability under this law. It is all on your organization. So you have to ensure that contractually these are getting passed down. Why this is important, how to sort of broach this with stakeholders, just show this slide. I think it will be good enough. Okay, the penalties, as you are all aware, ranges from 250 crore, and it's all itemized, right? So if it's breach of data because you did not take proper precaution, 250 crore. If you fail to notify, 200 crore, etc. So these are like the thresholds which are there. The good part is no criminal sanction, no imprisonment. Notice, again, I'm not getting into too much detail. We'll keep talking about it, but there are two things. One is notice, one is consent. And I'm sure Ashok will also talk about it. So it has to be, again, more specific, itemized, granular in nature, understandable independently. So you cannot have like a wishy-washy statement that you agree to, our privacy policy and terms of use, including marketing, etc. All of this bundled may not work going forward. Okay. You have to give the rights to, right to, withdraw consent and exercise other rights. Consent related request, again, this is the other part, notice and then consent. It has to be specific, informed, all of that you see. You have to give the right to withdraw. It has to be in English and all the languages of the 8th schedule of constitution, which is 20 languages. Okay, you have to give the right to the individual to at least access these. Ashok maybe will talk more about it. He has got a fabulous solution to this. You have to also give details of the data protection officer if you are a significant data fiduciary, or a similar person if you are not. Now, these draft rules have talked about certain baseline requirements on, what reasonable security practice and procedures could be brought into play. Again, I'm not sort of going deep into it, but this is what has been called out immediate action items, probably. And again, there are things which Ashok will talk about. We'll also talk about data inventorization and all of that. But please do look. We already talked about the number of things to be done in relation to notice, consent, evidence of keeping notice and consent, that I did send the notice and people have consented, because in a bad day you will have to prove it. Okay, valid contract between you and a data processor, or in all parlance, whether it's a data controller, processor controller, I will say have proper clear agreements between all of you, because the data protection board will ask you for that contract and it could be dissected. They will see that did you transparently tell things to the individuals from you whom you took data, and also they will check whether between the two parties, what was the arrangement, who was responsible for which part of the data. And mind you, this is already happening right now. Whilst we are talking about the future, the data protection board, in some of the recent cyber breach incidents, SEBI has asked questions like this. There was a KYC related breach, you are all aware, I'm sure. They say that, do you have a contract with this service provider? Please provide us a copy of that. Next question is, please underline, highlight the provisions which are in relation to data privacy protection. Please let us know, did you actually check that this particular counterparty is able to stand behind what is written there? Also, did you ever ask them to delete data? If yes, please provide evidence. So this is not future, this is happening right now. Other things, as you can see, is translation related requirement, which we should start preparing for. Appointment of personnel like DPO or someone equivalent. Data principal rights, erasure, right of correction, etc. We should start preparing for. And verifiable parental consent in case you're handling children's data. So I'll just stop there. I hope I've been able to stick to the time. maybe I've overshot a bit, but back to you guys.
Thanks a lot, Supratim. I think we'll come back with some questions. Maybe Ashok, you can take things up now, and then we'll go over questions after you're done.
Since Supratim has scared everyone, it's but don't think of it as bad. Actually, the way I look at it is there are things you can do which can seriously help you in being compliant with the law. And I'm just going to share my slides. Just give me a second. It's not as scary as the law says it is the first thing I would say. Give me a second. Can you guys see my screen? Just going to go slideshow. Yeah. So I'm going to look at it from a implementation perspective. Obviously, the law is clear in my opinion, and I don't think you need to wait. The rules are not going to give you any more clarity. If you're thinking you're going to know exactly what is PII data, how should I use it for this purpose, they're not going to tell you that. They're not going to tell you how to create a notice. This is a principle-based law, as Supratim has mentioned. So it is in our interest to start to interpret it and start to put processes in place for compliance. So the way from an implementation perspective, the way we sort of tell our customers is to think of it as a problem of flow and a problem of stock. Stock is essentially your bad karma from the past. You need to fix it, but you have it's going to be tougher to fix. But flow you can fix today, right? Flow is what the journeys that your users are going through right away. So you can kind of change your journeys right away, and then you will anyway have time to fix the stock over a period of time. The problem really is that as if flow you don't solve now, you have more stock to fix 18 months from now. So that's one of the things that if you remember Supratim said is that get ready now, because after 18 months it's going to get worse, right? Because there will be what is that called, fines, etc. So it's better to start now. The other one to do is so there are, the way we look at it as three real problems. One is taking notice and giving consent, and then the second part is about where is your data sitting in your environment. It might be a bunch of data might be sitting in some database. It might be sitting in logs for all you know, because some product manager or some engineer thought that he wants to do some error checking and he dropped PII data into a log. You don't know. These things my guys have done. I'm sure every techie has done that before. I'm sure all us startups have done it before. So you need to inventorize exactly where your PII sits. Have you encrypted it everywhere, not just in the core database? And also at the same time, which processors you might have given that data to. Let's think about what that processor might mean. Let's say you're an insurance company and you have a processor who you have a DSA who's collecting data on your behalf or doing a KYC on your behalf. That's a guy who has data, your principal's data, and therefore you need to make sure that he is deleting, he's storing the data properly, he's not using it for any other purpose other than what you have highlighted. If, for example, you are a processor, but you're saving it because for making it easy checkout next time, some of the payment gateways do this. The moment you say save my data for easy checkout later, you are a fiduciary, and you stop being a processor, because now you're storing your data for a different purpose than what the fiduciary told you. This is largely the example might be a payment gateway, for example, which might say, hey, there's a tick mark which says for save my data for next time I come in, right? So there is also some element of, are you a processor? When do you stop being a processor and when do you start become a fiduciary? And there are nuances there. You need to sort of look at your own operating model. That's why you have to kind of look at your own operating model and see how you want to treat PII data. One thing you would want to think about also is let's say you say that, hey, cool, I'll make this only a legal language issue with my processors. I'll pass on all liability to my processors. A lot of your processors' net worth might be only like 10 crores. When you get a fine of 250 crores, you have no option. That guy is not going to be able to pay. He'll shut the company down. So really, you really need to start getting serious about audit, around how do you know that he is deleted? How do you know he's using it only for that purpose? How do you know he's not amalgamating it across 10 of your 10 customers and starting to do analytics on it to maybe sell that data somewhere else? You really need to be serious about that, right? So in terms of your operating model, the thing to do immediately is to start mapping your journeys, mapping where your data is flowing, which processors are using that data, and start to put your systems and tooling behind getting that ready. Just FYI, a consent manager will not solve this problem for you, because this is an internal compliance problem, not an external compliance problem. The notice you present, the consent manager will only present that notice. He's not going to create that notice for you. So you still need to create the notice. You should know what purpose that is used for. So even when the consent manager comes after 2 years, that's not a panacea to your problem of compliance. That's only to kind of present the notice to the principal, right? And in terms of flow and stock, start the process in parallel, but flow you can actually solve in like a couple of months. It doesn't take that long, and we can kind of start looking at it as, how do I design privacy by design? And I'll explain what that means. Privacy by design is, just think about it this way. You have a journey. Now, at the point of audit, or at the point, like you did an audit of this journey, you called one of the top consultants, and they came and audited the journey and said, here's what you need to present the notice as. You have maybe 10 journeys that touches a customer. Your very smart product manager, which a lot of us have, goes in. He's not trained on privacy or the law. He goes in and says, hey, this is increasing drop-offs. I'm just going to change the notice. I'm going to just make it terms of use and privacy policy. Suddenly you just go, you become non-compliant. This intelligent product manager has just exposed you to fines, right? Now, how do you then make sure that your journeys that you have audited and made sure that they are compliant, stay compliant? And so honestly, there are tools to do this with, but do not think of it as just an audit function. It is actually an ongoing compliance. It's an ongoing compliance function, and you need to look at it as any time a design change happens, it goes through some sort of check. The biggest one is regulation changes in our country. It changes very frequently. So in all likelihood, there will be new regulation that keeps coming up from the sectoral regulators, from DPDP itself as well. So how fast can you react to regulatory changes also becomes a big part of your flow, as well as a big part of your compliance story. In terms of building a privacy posture, if you look at like from a baseline perspective, start to think about whether you're a fiduciary or a data processor. You cannot, one of the funniest things is some of our customers told us, I want to be a data processor and not a fiduciary. How do I do that? No, that's not how it works. If you're collecting customer data and using it and defining the purpose, you are a data fiduciary and not a processor. You can't suddenly become a processor. If you are collecting data, like let's say you're an aggregator and you're collecting data and passing it on to 10 other fiduciaries, you don't magically become a data processor. You are a fiduciary because you're determining the purpose that you will pass that data on to 10 other fiduciaries. So aggregators are not excused and can't term themselves as data processors. So, and also when in case, sometimes you might end up being a data processor as well as a fiduciary. A good example would be a payment gateway. You're a data processor until you're following the process that has been defined by the bank or by the fiduciary or by your e-commerce players, etc. But the moment you save that data for future checkout, you become a fiduciary. At that point, you need to now present your own notice, right? So be very careful and understand where you fall and where you fall in that process of in your own processes. You also look at what are your different data collection touch points. Think of it as an omni-channel problem, not only as a digital problem. The reason Supratim mentioned something early on, he said that the moment your physical data gets scanned and gets put into your database, by definition, it is under this law. So you will have data of a processor flowing in from physical touch point then goes to digital and maybe gets processed digitally. So every touch point needs to be mapped and figured out whether you need to present a notice at that touch point, right? The other one, in that, once you understand your baseline, next is to actually present the notice, because you cannot obviously present a notice unless you know what you're collecting that data for and what data is absolutely mandatory. Also think about whether you need to collect certain data points. Do you need to collect if Ashok is married? A lot of our e-commerce players collect this to just send me anniversary messages. You're increasing your the places that you're increasing that kind of places you can get fined on. So in terms of just figuring out your data itself, do not collect more data than required for the main purpose. Obviously you can if you're collecting data for other purposes, then take consent for it, right? And do all your notices now notice needs to be clear. There's one thing that you'll have to think about is that earlier you had your privacy policy and terms of use, and somebody clicked that. Some product manager, somebody decides that the privacy policy we need to add 3 more lines to this. Some lines could be as onerous as I will collect this data forever. I'll keep this data forever, even after your death. By the way, a lot of the banks had some very onerous privacy policies. Now people change that, and they don't know which user gave consent for what. So as these privacy policies change, you have no way to know whether Ashok gave consent to your earlier privacy policy or not. So one of the things that you have to think about and design your systems for is what I would call immutability of consent. My consent that I gave you earlier should be immutable, cannot be changed. What you do when you want a new consent is to add on to the old consent of Ashok's. Right. So you can provide bite-sized consent over a period of time, which kind of builds what I would call the consent notice for an individual and consent purposes for that individual. Right. And obviously, I think there are a lot of questions around, hey, this is going to have a lot of drop-offs. Oh my God, like these, will people give, isn't there going to be a consent fatigue, etc.? One term to kind of think about is, think of it as happy friction. Start looking at what, giving consent for only that incremental purpose at any given time. You can take consent later as well. Like, for example, you don't need to take everything upfront. You can take something now, and then as I use the product for some other purpose, you can just pop up a new consent with what I would call bite-sized consent. So there are provisions and there are capabilities that tools have today which allow you to do those kind of things. Data principal rights. One of the most important things is revocation and updation. Obviously, nominate. We can talk about nomination and in a bit. Nomination is in only certain scenarios, but let's focus a lot more on review, update, revoke, and grievance. In review, for example, I as a data principal want to know where I want to review what all consent I've given to you and what are you using it for. I might want to know which processors have my data as well. So that you need to have tooling in place to map all of that inside your org. Otherwise, you can't provide that within 72 hours for sure, right? And so review is an important step. Update, there are regulations that will change, as well as you might want, like maybe there's a new KYC regulation. You might want to update the consent based on that. A principal or a principal might invoke an updation. So you might say, hey, I gave you consent for marketing, but now you're troubling me a little too much. You sent me way too many SMSs. I want to revoke that. Or I want to update that and say, marketing, do not send me on WhatsApp, or for example, something like that. So I might update that consent, or I might revoke consent altogether, right? Like I might say, hey, you cannot have my data at all. Now, obviously, when you revoke consent, you have two things that you need to keep in mind. There are sectoral regulations which say that, like for example, RBI says that you should keep the data for 7 years. The sectoral regulators, so you don't have to delete it immediately. Your sectoral regulators takes precedence over the DPDP Act, especially for compliance, etc. So revocation is is also dependent on what the sectoral regulators say as well. Now, if you can think about this, the way this works is you're provided all this notice, etc. But there are not just one regulation that you need to keep in mind. There's actually now probably 4 or 5, especially if you're a bank, you might have to adhere by RBI. And let's say you're cross-selling insurance and your IRDA. If you're cross-selling your wealth products, then you have to adhere by SEBI as well as the DPDP Act and any other regulator for that matter. So think about how do you orchestrate all of this with the appropriate regulator. In terms of grievance redressal, remember what will happen is think about it this way: you might have an incident. Incident might be a breach, which has happened because your processor breached data, your internal employees breached data, your system was hacked. Most of the time, most of our systems, I would say, are relatively secure, especially if you're a large fiduciary. You have probably taken care of all of this already. As a small startup, maybe you haven't, and start getting serious about it, because when we started, we didn't think about it too much, but by about 2 or 3 years, we started to we started to take security very seriously, right? But let's say there's a breach because of these 3 things, right? You need to be able to inform all the principals that were affected as soon as possible. Now, also, you don't want to go now, if you have not mapped your processor to the principal properly, if you have not mapped your databases to the principals properly, you'll have to send emails to every single principal of yours, that is every single customer of yours, which obviously creates a massive problem. So being able to map which principal's data sits with which processor, which database, which Excel sheet inside your company had which principal's data is super important. And again, think of tooling as a way to solve this problem. You will not. Grievance is literally a needle in a haystack problem. At the point of a grievance coming in or an incident happening, you don't know how many people are affected. So you are going to kind of look at, okay, the problem probably happened in this patch and not in this other patches, right? So you will send that information only to those principals, and you'll have to respond to the DPP. And I think and Supratim can correct me if I'm wrong here. There is a clause which says that the principal needs to be informed before you go to DPP, or you need to tell the DPP whether the principal was informed. Supratim, you want?
Yeah, that's right. So the way they're expecting under the rules is that you immediately go and inform Data Protection Board with some minimal information. But within 72 hours, you go to them with a lot more information. And one of the line items there is the intimation that you have already made to the individuals. Now, that is de facto meaning that within 72 hours, you have already informed them. We, during the Mumbai consultation recently held, I think this week, we checked that is this the intent, and the folks from MATE said yes, that is the intent. So
yeah. So you can't do this without tooling and systems, right? This is not possible human, like with a bunch of 20 people team which is looking at these data points, especially if your amount of data that you're dealing with is large. So start setting up tooling for your systems. So finally, in terms of third-party risk, think of it as obviously the appropriate contractual clauses. But apart from that, think of governing them, because contractual clauses only take you up to a certain point, because they might not be the net worth might not be able to take over that full what is that called, fine that you might be imposed. Therefore, it's better to audit them, better to make sure that they are doing what they're said they're doing, as well as to regularly think about if these processors have enough sort of ability to handle the complexity of the DPDP law as well. Right? Yeah, that's about my what I was supposed to cover. I think we can open it up to questions, and in the end, we can show some demo, or I can show the demo now.